the VIKTOS Core Containment. So 3 things to like with this training shoe is number 1, this can be a really good no frills model for doing a little bit of everything in the gym. This model has a stable enough midsole to train pretty heavy in, so whether you're doing free weights or machine work, this shoe has done a good job with overall stability, and it also feels light enough and bouncy enough for cross-training and cross-training workouts. I also like that it is a pretty comfortable daily driver. So if you want that shoe that you can wear out and about and then to the gym, this can be a good option to go with, especially if you're looking for something that's just very consistent with its construction and feel on the foot. The second thing to like with the Core Containment is how lightweight this shoe is. So if you want a model that has a nice lightweight feel on the foot, it doesn't feel like a ton when you're wearing it, this can be a great option to go with. It doesn't feel overly clunky like a lot of the modern day cross-training shoes do, and it's a little bit more stripped down regarding its materials and construction, which is an ask that I think many of us, myself included, have wanted, or at least just an option on the market that is going to be a good do-it-all style shoe that doesn't feel like a cinder block on the foot. The third thing to like with the VIKTOS Core Containment, and this can also be a con, I'll talk about that in a second, is its overall fit. So the shoe has a decent width up here in the forefoot, and it has a decently wide midfoot. There's not a crazy aggressive taper. So I think if you have an E to double E or D width foot, and a flatter foot at that, this model can be a good option to go with. The midfoot doesn't feel wicked aggressive. It doesn't feel like there's a huge arch pushing into your foot if that's something you don't want with your trainer. So it can be a good option for that foot anatomy. Now, that does come at a cost, and I'll talk about it in a second. But overall, the Core Containment has been a really good option for doing a little bit of everything in the gym, especially on hotter days or hotter gym session days, and it does a decent job for flatter and wider feet. But now let's talk about a couple of cons that I have with the Core Containment. All right, so thus far I have found 2 cons that kind of irk me with this model, or at least I know irk others and I've noted with this model. So the first con is that if you are a die-hard VIKTOS shoe fan and you constantly buy them for their width and their very spacious upper volume, you will want to keep in mind that this model does run a smidge narrower and its upper volume is a little bit lower. Now you can take out this insole and go insoleless and you'll get a little bit more volume, or swap it for a slightly thinner insole for a tiny bit more room. But for my friends out there who have loved VIKTOS for their overly spacious fit, this model will be a step in a slightly snugger direction. They also tend to run a little bit short, and I'll talk about that in my sizing and fit section, but overall this model is going to fit a smidge snugger once again compared to your other VIKTOS shoes, so not a complete deal breaker, especially for my folks out there without specific asks, but for my VIKTOS diehard fans out there, that will be something to consider with this shoe. The second con that I have with this model is the lacing system. So I personally am in this headspace of trying to decide if I like it or not, and why I just don't love it from the jump. I'm like trying so hard to figure out why and figure out exactly what's irking me with this model, but I feel like the 2 loops down here and then the 3 traditional eyelets up here, it makes it kind of awkward to loosen up. So for example here, and I know maybe this is just a user error and I'm just not very bright and can't figure it out, but I feel like it's awkward to try to get this model to feel cohesive with the looseness or tightness throughout the entirety of the midfoot. Like for example, the bottom down here is a little bit more spacey, but then up here, it's still a little bit tight, and like you can adjust it and play with these, but because these laces are also a little bit sticky and they run long, it can kind of be a pain in the butt to adjust. Also, with these laces, they do run exceptionally long, as I just mentioned, which isn't necessarily a whole deal breaker, but for example, we don't have another eyelet back here for lace locking, so you can't really get rid of that extra slack. So I do think this is going to be a model that you have to double knot. Again, not a total deal breaker, but you may want to swap in different laces that actually fit better if that is something that's going to really annoy you with this shoe. But from a performance standpoint, the Core Containment has been exactly what I've expected it to be, so I don't really have any major performance knocks against it. They're just little quality of life things that I think could bother some folks and lifters depending on what you're after. To break down the performance of the Core Containment, I'll discuss how this shoe does for lifting, cross-training, short runs, and daily wear. In the context of lifting, the shoe does a good job. It does exactly what you'd want out of just a generalist trainer in the gym. It gives you enough stability to train hard on machines, but then also if you're doing free weight exercises, you can load well up to 455 in this shoe and not get a ton of compression with this midsole. Also, because this shoe does have a slightly smoother transition here from the forefoot into midfoot, I honestly love that for giving you a bit more stability too. When you're doing single leg work or doing heavy hack squats or leg presses, it feels pretty good across the board. And this outsole here with the herringbone tread tread gives you a ton of grip on different surfaces. Now, what I will say is this model does have an 8mm drop. So if you don't love a ton of heel with your shoes for lifting, you will want to consider that and go with a flatter option. When it comes to cross training, I have also enjoyed this shoe. The upper does a pretty good job of locking on the foot, and I honestly just like how lightweight the shoe is. It breaks in really quick, and if you want a shoe that feels a little bit easier to have on the foot for longer durations when you're jumping, doing multi-directional movements, or like sled workouts on turf and whatnot, this model should suffice. Now, it doesn't have the most beefy upper regarding giving you lateral lockdown, but I do think for most foot anatomies, if you're not spilling over in the shoe with a 3E foot width, you'll be fine in this model for general cross training. And if you're doing a HIIT session here and there, or even a CrossFit WOD, this model can also work plenty fine for those asks. Now, when it comes to short runs, this model is okay. I would say probably cap your running to about a mile and a half tops in the shoe at one time. If you're doing short intervals, this model will feel fine. And we do have a bit of a bevel back here in the heel, so it's gonna be a little bit smoother of a transition compared to some of the other cross training shoes out there. But for short runs, it performs as you'd expect for like a medium density foam midsole training shoe. You can use it for short intervals and it'll be fine, but for anything longer than a mile and a half, you're gonna wanna look for something that's either a little bit more plush or forgiving for that context. For daily wear, I have actually really enjoyed this shoe. I like it for 3 reasons. Number 1, the upper has a nice breathability to it, very lightweight. I see this as a good warm weather or hot gym friendly shoe. Number 2, it breaks in really fast and it does have a good amount of flexibility. So if you want a shoe that's gonna not take it forever to break in or have a ton of rub on the boot and whatnot, this can be a good option to go with. And then number 3, the width works well for my foot. I have an E to double E foot width, and this model has fit well for my context. So if you're similar, I do think you'll appreciate the feel and comfort of the shoe for daily wear. All right, so when it comes to the sizing and fit of the Core Containment, I have a few suggestions here. So I am traditionally a US 10 with a normal arch and an E to double E foot width. I went with the 10 in this shoe, and I am just pushing its capabilities regarding feeling comfortable. So should I have sized up a half size? Potentially, but it does feel comfortable enough for my needs. And so that said, my suggestions for sizing this model is number 1, if you traditionally like VIKTOS shoes because they have more room and you will appreciate the space, go up a half size. This model's length runs a smidge shorter than the other shoes, so just hedge your bets, go up a half size, and you won't have to do a whole return process with the Core Containment. Also, if you are switching to the shoe from other shoes and you traditionally have a thumb's width length at the end of your current shoe's toe box, I would say go with the same size in the Core Containment. If you have less than a thumb's width length and you like having a bit more room in your toe box to sway the toes and have a little bit more room, you'll also want to go up a half size in this shoe. If you have less room, again, this model can run a little bit short, so just hedge your bets, go up a half size. And now when it comes to just general foot widths and my recommendations there, for narrow and D width feet, true to size should be an okay bet. And then for E double E and 3E plus foot widths, up a half size to a full size can also be a safe bet. But again, I think if you just go off those first 2 tips with the thumb option based off if you're coming off of other training shoes or if you've already worn VIKTOS shoes, you'll be in a really good spot for buying this model online and not having to do the whole return process with this model. All right, so now who should buy the VIKTOS Core Containment shoe? Number 1, if you have a wider or flatter foot. So say flatter with an E to double E foot width, this shoe will feel awesome for your needs. Number 2, if you want a generalist training shoe for warmer month wear, this can be a good option to go with. It breathes pretty well and it's super lightweight, so it can be a really good hot gym or hot summer day friendly shoe. Number 3, if you're somebody that likes having a shoe that breaks in really quick and has good outsole durability for casual wear and you want that all-in-one trainer, this can also be a good option to go with. It's relatively no frills and it tends to do a good job across the board. Now, who shouldn't buy the VIKTOS Core Containment? Number 1, if you're a CrossFit athlete, you may want to look into other options. This model's midsole is pretty exposed here, so you can have some friction and breakdown issues with this shoe if you're pushing the abrasion on this model a ton, especially on the medial side of this shoe. Number 2, if you have a 3E or 4E foot width and a super high instep, you will likely want to go with a different VIKTOS model or a different training shoe. This model might feel a little bit limiting for you. And then number 3, if you're somebody that needs a shoe with a lot of lateral reinforcement, you may also want to look into other options that are going to give you a slightly lower volume in the upper to help give you additional lockdown. But I think that will be such a specific and niche ask that for most individuals watching this review, you likely likely will not need to stress that. All right, so when it comes to the weight, heel toe drop, and insole in the Core Containment, for my size 10 US shoe here, we have a weight of 10.65 ounces. The heel to toe drop of the shoe sits at 8 millimeters, and this model does have a thin foam removable insole. All right, so now let's break down the construction of the Core Containment. Up here on the forefoot, you have an extended outsole layer that wraps up. It is pretty wide and it has been pretty dang durable thus far. We also have a mesh upper with nylon overlays for additional durability. We also have a Storm Strike PFC-free DWR finish, which does help resist stains and some water with this shoe. Now don't go submerging them into puddles, obviously, but that's why I also like this shoe for daily wear, is it does a pretty good job at reflecting the elements, which other training shoes that are just pure mesh or knit, they don't really do. They just kind of absorb the water. So that's where I think this model can also excel. Looking at the midsole, you have a high rebound EVA foam midsole that runs throughout the entirety of this shoe. And then we do have a lateral outsole lay here on the medial side, back here on the heel, and then a tiny one here on the medial side. Looking at the boot, you have a bit of structure to this boot and an external tab to help pull this shoe on. We don't have the most structure to the boot, so if you're big on ankle support, you may want to consider that with this shoe, but shouldn't be an issue for most individuals. Looking at the midfoot of this shoe, you have 5 core eyelets that go up. Once again, you have these loops down here, and then you have a traditional eyelet system here. I find it to be a little bit hit or miss, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are in the comments. The tongue is a padded mesh and it's also gusseted, and we also have an additional loop here. Again, the laces do run pretty long, like this is double knotted and they're still pretty dang long. And then looking at the outsole of this shoe, we have a full rubber tread. We have a herringbone tread that goes throughout the internal of this shoe up here in the forefoot, midfoot, and then heel. And then on the lateral side, we have the slightly denser rubber that runs throughout to help give you additional stability. And then you also have some breaks up here in the forefoot for additional flexibility. Once again, this model does have a removable insole, but if you have additional questions on the construction of this shoe, drop a comment down below. All right, y'all, that wraps up my review of the VIKTOS Core Containment. Honestly, this is a pretty slept on shoe. It's pretty solid across the board and it's relatively no frills, which I personally love. I also appreciate how lightweight and flexible it is. If you have additional questions on this shoe, drop a comment down below or hit me up on Instagram, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.